All right, our first speaker is Dr. Heather Bleacher, who is an associate professor in the Department of Family Medicine at the University of Colorado. She serves as director of community health initiatives and outcomes and has co-led family medicine residency community health curriculum focused on population health, advocacy, and community engagement since 2012. Her work centers on helping clinics and training programs build a more inclusive, community responsive care. Our second speaker joining us today is Dr. Allyson Westling, MPH, who is an associate program director at St. Joseph Hospital Family Medicine Residency Program. She earned her medical degree and Master of Public Health from Tufts University and completed residency training at the University of Colorado Family Medicine Residency's Denver Health Track. Her interests include underserved care, immigrant and refugee health, graduate medical education, and a broad scope of family medicine practice. And last but certainly not least, we are joined by Dr. Bernard Birnbaum, who is Associate Program Director at the Fort Collins Family Medicine Residency Program. He is a family physician with a background in full spectrum care, has special interests in adolescent health, community medicine, public health integration, quality improvement, and care for underserved populations. He has been part of the Fort Collins program since 2006 and has served in residency leadership for more than a decade. All right, with that said, Doctors Bleacher, Westling, and Birnbaum, thank you very much for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Okie doke. We'll get things started. We have a cozy little group of people I know well, so we'll have a great conversation and make sure we keep it lively for the people who will be watching this later. So I'm Heather Bleacher. And I am very excited to be speaking with you. What we're going to be talking about today is, first of all, reviewing best practices, idealized practices for community engagement as described by the principles of community engagement and the principles of trustworthiness. We'll be talking about the realities of community engagement and the challenges that we face in residency settings. And then we'll hear from Allyson and Bernie about their models for community engagement in their residencies. So who can resist not starting a presentation with a definition? So what is community engagement? I think there's a million ways that we could describe it. I think it's lovely that people all have their own personal definitions for community engagement and what it means to them. But in the latest edition of the Principles of Community Engagement, it is described as a process that builds sustainable relationships through trust and collaboration, and that it should be enduring, equitable, and culturally sensitive to all participants. And the really key thing here is that at the heart should be a shared goal of addressing the concerns of the community, as opposed to addressing the needs and the priorities of the outside entity. I have some discussion questions here that Emily Spencer can answer, but we can still all chime in. So why is community engagement important to family medicine residency education in general, and why is it important to your residency? And Allyson and Bernie, please feel free to also.
All right, I'm in Bleacher. You called me in. I'm unmuting. Yeah, so as I'm an APD at CUFMR, and my primary focus is in graduate medical education because of that, rather than, even though I'm a good family doc and I care about the community, it's less my, area of expertise. So from my perspective, it is one of, the training requirements. And I love that you just mentioned that it is, focused on the needs of the community, not the needs of, per se, in this case, the residents or the program. So I am really happy to hear about how you, as our local master in chief of this curriculum, really balances those competing needs that we have.
Well, the trick is I won't be doing that till June, so you'll have to stay tuned. Allyson or Bernie, do you guys want to, I know you have whole sections later, but I don't know if you want to throw out a sense or two.
I mean, this is just a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I went into family medicine because it is the field in medicine that pays attention to the patient in the context of community. So it seemed important. And what I would reflect on is that half the things that I end up doing, I fell into just because I'm in a smaller community as a physician and people look for engagement. And I think if you can bring to that some of these principles, it allows you to act on a higher level. And we need to expose our residents to that. The other thing I was going to say is that with sort of the increasing corporatization of healthcare and all physicians sort of being employees, I really worry, or I see that people are by definition less engaged, because part of being a business person in family medicine is engaging with the people around you, you know, and that's just not always necessary as part of in that corporate world. And I worry that physicians then lose context with their community. So I think setting an expectation in residency seems really important. So
yeah, and I agree. I think we believe, residents, when they go out into their practice environments, are going to be part of a community and often seen as leaders just de facto by the nature of the profession. And so kind of learning those skills early, learning how to engage and be an advocate for a community is important. And that's kind of the foundation for what our curriculum was built on.
Awesome. So there was a study that came out in 1998, quite a long time ago, by Pathman et al. And it just surveyed primary care physicians and asked them what kind of, how are you involved in your community? And the responses that they got back broadly fell into one of these four categories. The icons that I use have little to no meaning, but I discovered them on PowerPoint and said they simply must be here. So don't read too much into what that panda means. So number one is sort of the biggest, broadest around identifying and intervening in the community's health concerns. That can mean a lot of things, but that can be showing up in public health spaces or partnering with community organizations to work on their own projects as opposed to pulling them in on your projects. Two is around responding to the particular health issues of local cultural groups when caring for patients. And that's their language. I think it goes beyond just cultural groups, but any group that maybe has been historically marginalized or just has particular health needs. Third is around coordinating local community health resources in the care of patients, right? So learning about where the food resources are, or transportation, or intimate partner violence resources, et cetera, and how do you fold that into how you're caring for your patients day to day. And then the fourth one, I think, is just really about citizenship. So assimilating into the community and its organizations. How do you show up as a physician who lives and or works in the neighborhood or is just a citizen of the community? So I think that even though this was done back in 1998, I think it still really neatly describes what the horizon is like for physicians as members of community. And so since these are the activities that our graduates will be potentially doing as they show up in community in their future jobs, it's our job to prepare them to do these things well and do them in a way that actually serves the needs of the community. So what are the principles of community engagement? They were first published in 1997 with a second edition in 2011, and then a new edition sort of miraculously that it was still published in 2025. And these are, recommendations of best principles and practices that have been created by largely researchers, but also public health specialists and community organizations and individual community members. And we'll go through them sort of briefly, but again, it's really just meant to be a North Star. How do you treat community? How can you be a good and authentic partner and avoid harm, really? And then in May of 2021, the AMC came out with their principles of trustworthiness. And in a lot of ways, I feel like they are really in direct conversation with the CDC's principles of community engagement, and really a very direct response. These were developed through AMC and the AMC's Charge National Collaborative on Health Equity. And they did a series of nationwide sort of focus groups and interviews with lay community members to get their insight on how can healthcare organizations, researchers, how can they achieve trustworthiness? And this really, the recommendations here are really centered from the community perspective, and less so from the researcher's perspective. So I'm going to just try to briefly run through these and do my best to balance reading what I think are some really beautifully written words with brevity. And again, this is just like table setting. So I have these kind of coupled by theme. So the first theme that comes through is transparency. The principle of community engagement say they're pretty simple. Be clear about the purposes or goals of the engagement effort and the populations or communities that you want to engage. And you'll notice that the principles of trustworthiness are written a little bit more casually and less formally, so that can be sort of fun, and they're not messing around. So the principles of trustworthiness say, show your work. The community doesn't think you're perfect. The past is always present. And no secrets, no surprises. Really, this is sort of the same thing that principles of community engagement are saying, but really just a little bit more edge and a little more real talk to them. Next is relationship building. And these are really talking about the exploration and the homework that goes into meaningful relationship building. And they challenge people to look at the diversity within the diversity of any community and to really put in the time and effort to learn deeply. So principles of community engagement are highlighting learning about culture, economic conditions, social networks, history of relationships, and what are the perceptions of community of healthcare, academia, medicine, whatever, and vice versa. And on the principles of trustworthiness side, they're saying you can't just go hit one gay bar and say that you now understand the gay community in your neighborhood, right? There's more than one bodega. Not all gay people go to the club, and not all people of color go to the same church or go to one church at all. So really about, if you're going to build relationships, it's going to take time, and it needs to go deeper than you think. The last thing I really like on the principles of trustworthiness side is break bread and share a meal at their tables, and the importance of going out to the community settings and not just staying within the confines of your clinic or your campus or whatnot. Respect and responsibility. Principles of community engagement say it's pretty straightforward, build and maintain relationship and trust by working with individuals or leaders, and that all partners must be active and respected from the start. And then principles of trustworthiness take it, the community is already educated, and that's why it doesn't trust you. So the history is there. The principles of trustworthiness are really calling to the forefront, this rational response that mistrust is when there's been a history of injustice. I think they also call out the fact that institutions and people often approach community from an implied position of authority and with a bit of an attitude of, well, we're way up here and we're going to come down here and help you people in the community, which in no way conveys respect. And so really cautioning people about how they come to the table. Authenticity and commitment. Principles of community engagement say, have a partnership. And there's obviously more than that one tiny sentence to this principle, but the idea there is like, it should be true partnership. Whereas on the trustworthiness side, they say, walk the walk. Don't just give us an organizational pledge. We want to see something happen. And just having an office of community engagement or whatever the title is not going to cut it. It can't just be one person. It has to be everybody. And also it can't just be the people who are from historically marginalized backgrounds. It needs to be through and through to the organization if we're going to be building real community relationships. Diversity and intersectionality, again, building off of what we talked about before around understanding the diversity within the diversity. And also this idea here that just having a community advisory board isn't enough, that they are, people on a community advisory board are often people who step forward, and it's helpful to do the work to find the people who aren't always going to step forward and go out and outreach to hear those voices that aren't always at the table. humility is so important that I have 2 slides on this one. So, I like this because I think that the principles around humility are really important counter programming to our medical training, right? We go to medical school and we learn, okay, our job is to look at someone and do some tests and tell them what's wrong with them and then tell them how to fix it. And that just is not going to work in community spaces. And we really need to flip that on its head. And so principles of community engagement focus on recognizing the rich community assets and strengths that are there and making sure that you help to mobilize those and release control of whatever it is that you're working on. And principles of trustworthiness say people closest to the injustice are also those closest to the solutions to that injustice. So kind of drawing from those survival tactics and strategies that have been there for ages, the importance of co-leading, sharing power. And then principles of community engagement also concur with that outside institutions must view community members as experts and recognize that strategies and solutions must be for the community and by the community. 2 more of these and then you get to stop listening to me. So maintaining the relationship, it's really easy in a grant-funded world or a project-based world to come in and out just for the life of that project. And these principles really focus on making sure that before the grant, after the grant, that you continue that relationship and stay in touch and make sure that you're not just dropping in and dropping out. And then the last one focuses on being really intentional in how you build trustworthiness. You can't just walk into a space and say, we're trustworthy, why don't you just come along? You have to take deliberate steps to show that and earn that. And so remembering to keep at it. And I think that this is really poignant too. And remember, it takes a long time to build trust and only a split second to destroy it. It's really easy for that to happen. And so just taking your time and being really careful. So I do encourage anyone who hasn't read the full principles of community engagement or trustworthiness to really get in there, because they're just richer than what I shared in the last 5 minutes. But I wanted us to talk about more than that. So for the group, I'm curious about which of these principles you think come more easily in our residency settings, and which of these feel really challenging. And again, I'll hope that our presenters as participants situation will work.
I think that for at least from my experience with our residents, that there are a lot of most of our residents, and not all of them, come with the sense that community engagement and community is important, and so that the respect and responsibility and authenticity is there largely, but that a lot of these other things then relies on the program structure itself versus the individual kind of residents participating in it, because it inherently requires longitudinal and ongoing, maintaining relationships. So yeah, that's my thoughts about some of that.
Thanks, Emily. Bernie, were you unmuting?
Yeah, I mean, I'll address some of this in my comments, but I mean, I think there's a real difference between what type of program you're in, and what you guys can accomplish or at UNM or at CU is very different than what we can accomplish in a smaller community program. And I think the most important part of this is longitudinal mentorship. I think that's. I was really committed to going to a residency. I trained at Jefferson and Philly, which was a program that was really invested in the community. But there were, in the Department of Family Medicine, there were 120 faculty. right? And in the residency, you know, there are maybe 15 or 20 core faculty. So it's just a different thing when you're in a smaller place, and the residents are the only people providing the care. It sometimes becomes there becomes a lot of structural things that make this challenging. And the piece that stands out for me is the importance of having faculty mentorship be engaged and the program being engaged.
Yeah, I agree. All right.
In the chat, Leslie posted, I think our rural programs in New Mexico struggle to maintain relationships due to time constraints and limited resources.
Yeah, I'll talk about that a little bit because I think it's really, I mean, the reality of it is we're a business, right? So,
Corey, I see your pop.
Thanks, Heather. I was going to say, though, as you know, for me, obviously, it really is that sustainability and being consistent. But I tell you, the residents that we are getting more and more really come in with that authenticity and commitment to this work. That's why they're coming to family medicine. So I think that's the easiest thing for us with our residents. And it's just now just trying to being able to focus and scope and provide time for them to do that. But I think they come in with that respect and responsibility already. Because I agree with Emily.
Yeah, my concern is we beat it out of them.
Yeah.
I mean, particularly in the small program setting. So.
Yeah, I think it's easy to get residents to care. It's harder to get them the time, especially when they're knee deep in an ICU rotation or trying to make their clinic numbers. I think that I'll talk about it too in my portion, what we probably struggle with the most on our side of things. From often the community partner side, it's that commitment and what we can realistically offer given these kind of inherent challenges with resident schedules that change month to month or week to week.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. With that, actually, that's a perfect transition. I'll pass it over to Allyson Westling to hear about community engagement at St. Joseph's.
Okay, great. Hey, everybody. So as mentioned, I'm Allyson. I'm one of the APDs at the St. Joe's program and one of really 3 core faculty who've kind of taken the ownership over our community medicine curriculum. Just some background, we've been doing community medicine as part of our curriculum for many, many years, but about 3 years ago kind of had a revamp. So what I'm going to present today is just kind of an overview of what it looks like now. And we've had now 3 years of this version. So really the goals and objectives of our portion of community medicine in our curriculum is really kind of getting everybody up to speed first and foremost on social determinants of health. I think I'm always surprised that varying nature of what our incoming interns have gotten from medical school and even just attention to this. Some have done deep dives into social determinants. Others have barely gotten a lecture. So trying to standardize that. We also want to make sure that people are familiar with the community partners and resources here in Denver, where our program is. But then with ideas of the tools that they can use to identify community partners and resources in any future job or future community they may practice in. We do want them to engage in kind of experiential learning opportunities to actually apply these concepts so that they can familiarize themselves better where geographic communities often where patients live and work. So when we have a patient maybe commuting from East Aurora, for example, from our clinic, the thought being our residents have actually been there. They understand what that commute might be like and maybe transportation barriers somebody had to overcome in order to make the appointment, for example. We've also pivoted a bit in the last year or two around advocacy and really recognizing that as a pretty strong tenet of community medicine and community engagement. And then finally, just really setting people up to do this work long term and not just at touch points along the way. So the first, if you want to advance the slide for me, perfect, thank you. So the way our curriculum, just as a brief overview, works is that they have time built into all 3 years of residency. The first is very structured, and that's intentional. Again, the idea trying to get everybody kind of up to the same speed around community engagement and community health topics, and then to get to know the area and the community and the resources available to them. So we have done kind of a standard intern community medicine week. This usually equates to about 10 half days at some point during their first 3 months of residency as part of one of their core intern orientation rotations. This is kind of divided into structured and unstructured time. Structured experiences will be more along the lines of shadowing various community partners, really just kind of getting an intro to what they may be able to offer patients and offer the community. So some examples are Urban Peak. It's a homeless shelter for adolescents and youth experiencing homelessness. They do a lot of social networking and outreach, as well as have housing available and actually clinic services on their campus. Nurse Family Partnership is where nurses are paired with new families, maybe early people in early pregnancy or early postpartum period who may be under-resourced, to be able to allow families to really build once a baby is born. Harm Reduction Action Center is a needle exchange program and a community program really involved in addiction medicine here in Denver. And then Metro Caring, which is actually just down the street from our hospital, which is a kind of food bank, food justice center, and do a lot of social resources and support for people coming through their doors. So we have our interns during that week or 10 days really try to get experiences shadowing and working and getting to know folks at these particular partnerships. We also recognize a lot of the community resources actually can be homegrown in our clinic. We work at an FQHC lookalike and have really just a robust clinic team that can offer a lot of support to patients. So we're very intentional with structuring some activities that they're actually getting a chance to sit down and have one-on-one time with some of our clinic support members to better understand what they do and what they can offer. And then there's also a piece of addiction medicine, getting a chance to work in our MAT clinic, learning the resources that kind of goes a little bit hand in hand with the Harm Reduction Action Center work that they do. And then the other half of this time is more self-guided, a little bit more go at your own pace. So that would include things like a required reading and video list, doing a community walking tour. So modeled a lot actually after the CU's program, where we try to get people into communities where a lot of our patients live and work to really see what that landscape is like, learn a bit more about the historical context of the community, what resources are available geographically. And then we also do kind of a standard case review. So giving hypothetical examples, if, you were a single parent with a couple kids and had, X number of dollars to spend on meal planning, what would that actually look like? So the idea being taking a hypothetical case, but trying to actually do some thought around that. And so they realize, what patients might what challenges someone might face. And then the third kind of tenet is advocacy. This is kind of intentionally left to the end once the interns have gotten a chance to really experience their week. They have kind of a mini advocacy work with one of my colleagues who runs the advocacy piece, just again, getting people some basics around advocacy. A lot of logistics go into this year and this week during intern year. They all will have a pre-meeting with one of the three of us where we really review these materials, the goals and objectives of the rotation. The post-meeting is going to be presenting on some of the deliverables. So as a way to really make sure that they're doing the work with the time that they're allotted. And then, as I mentioned, getting more into advocacy. And then finally, we have an eye toward kind of what the long-term partnership will look like. So if you go to the next slide, R2 and R3 year are a lot less structured and really kind of left to the residents to have identified a long-term community partner or community advocacy project. They'll then have 10 protected half days in R3, 6, and R2 to do that community medicine work. But we've had residents who will elect to use more elective time to get that work done. We have options as kind of like a plug and play if there's an identified partner that we already have that they want to connect with. That could certainly be an option, but we're also very open to people finding and identifying their own partners. If anything, that kind of builds and expands the network of partnerships we can offer to future residents. Of course, a lot of this time is monitored to make sure, again, people are keeping this kind of high on their priority list, since it is easy to fall pretty far down as you get busy in residency and are faced with a lot of competing demands. So to that end, the three of us core faculty who are these kind of community med champions have kind of check-in points with them in their upper levels of training. And then we also have this as kind of a mandated check-in during their pre-CCC meetings with advisors, that they're checking in on identifying that community partner, making sure the work is getting done, that they're going and as they say they are, and kind of thing. Finally, we have kind of a longitudinal piece to our curriculum where everybody will get this kind of during all 3 years of training, which are these academic half days. We have 2 current standing academic half days where really the entire residency, if your rotation allows, will get blocked to do a longer afternoon. One is a Spanish language training program. Many of our patients in our clinic speak Spanish as their primary language. So really taking that time to get our residents, some practice with Spanish language training, take the certification exam if they wanted to be able to speak to patients without an interpreter. But we actually touch on, even larger issues of interpreter justice and using interpreters appropriately with patients to highlight that equity piece. And then we also do a spring community medicine partner highlight. So typically we'll have one of our long-term community partners come and either give a lecture or a topic overview of their program. And then many times we'll be able to actually get the cohort out into that community and maybe do a tour of their facility and actually get, eyes on or feet on the ground, eyes in the community of whatever that is. So we've done different ones at Metro Caring most recently last year. YMCA is a great diabetes prevention program that we did. Stout Street, which is one of our homeless shelters, not too far from our program, have been some more recent examples. And then finally, the doc of the day, advocacy. So with CAFMR, the Colorado Association of Family Medicine Residency, we are able to represent through the doc of the day, where we spend a day, usually every Thursday during the legislative session, advocating at the state capitol. And we do ask them not just to show up to that day, but to actually do some kind of advocacy deliverable, whether that's providing testimony, meeting and greeting with elected officials, writing an op-ed, or sitting in on some of the community or committee hearings. And so we've kind of made that a graduation requirement. So getting back to the question Heather posed earlier about kind of some of the challenges and opportunities, on our side of things, I think schedules have always been the most challenging part of this kind of revamped curriculum, especially during that intern orientation week that I mentioned. We do allow them to take PTO. So 10 half days may actually realistically only be 5 or 6 half days. And so trying to prioritize what within that intern week curriculum is most important for them to experience. We also, always are trying to work around ACGME rules. So with these extra meetings, especially around that intern community medicine week, still making sure people are getting their continuity clinic, which can be a little bit challenging if they're about to head off an inpatient rotation, for example. Our partners often want our residents to come in multiple groups, which is tricky when we have every resident is on their own rotation. We don't have a luxury of having all our interns kind of on the same schedule during this first part of the year. So many times, as best we can, we'll try to send 2 to 3 people at a time to work with these different partners. But we recognize that is always challenging when we're trying to arrange multiple meetings. And then finally, using like community medicine time that often gets taken if clinic numbers are low in like the R3 year. So needing them to then spend elective time to work with their longitudinal partner can sometimes be a bit of a hard ask for an R3. We really try to work on monitoring and maintaining these longitudinal partnerships, kind of going back to the principles of trustworthiness that Heather outlined. I think a lot of that takes advisor and resident buy-in, that these relationships are important and worth maintaining, just even a basic level of professionalism. So if a partner is expecting our residents, there is that level of onus on the resident to make sure they're showing up on time, they're appropriate, et cetera. And so I think a lot of the behind the scenes that myself and a few of the other faculty who run this curriculum find ourselves doing is often working to maintain these partnerships by way of communication and check-ins and making sure that the way that we are doing our curriculum is still aligned with what the partner needs from us and the time and the commitment they're able to give to us. We're also working to expand the advocacy piece that's been relatively new in like the last couple years. And so finding ways to really build in the advocacy skill sets in our curriculum has been important. We also have opportunities to develop a more formal public health curriculum, since again, residents do come in with kind of varying degrees of that background. And so to that end, we have a partnership with some colleagues at the School of Public Health. And so really trying to create a good opportunity there for how our colleagues there can support our residents. And then finally, just working on getting resident-led initiatives of this. I think up until now, it's been a lot more faculty-directed, kind of coming up with this curriculum redesign. So we would really love residents to take even more initiative on that. And then really the last thing to say is just how we best foster these community partnerships. So again, getting a lot into the trustworthiness principles, but really trying to be clear in our purpose and what we can provide, especially being realistic with residents' schedules and the inherent limitations that residents, they don't have every Tuesday in perpetuity to volunteer at a community partner, for example, because that schedule will change month to month. I mentioned the frequent check-ins. We do expect, as part of a lot of that self-study, is that the residents, before they present to these community partners, to do the work that they have done their background reading. And that could look like reading lists that we've compiled. It could be reading lists that the partner has asked them to read and become prepared. So that kind of gets you past a lot of the intro stuff. Working to add mutual values. So really just trying to maintain a consistent presence of residents, even if it's not an individual who is there every time, but in general, also seeing the value in then being a referral source. I think that comes to light with like our nurse family partnership, that we often see our referrals for them increase because our residents are familiar with the program, recognize patients more easily who may benefit. So they like that. And then finally, these long-term relationships. I think that comes down to many of our faculty actually spend their time volunteering and working with these partners, which only kind of helps strengthen those relationships beyond what the 3 of us core faculty can do. And I think that's kind of what I have to say. So I will turn it over. Thank you.
Awesome, Allyson. Thank you so much. That's really cool. I'm going to hand it over to Bernie. If folks have questions for Allyson, we'll hold them to the end, or feel free to toss them in the chat for she can answer now or hold them later. But we'll pass it over to Dr. Birnbaum.
So the first thing to say, there's a lot of similarities here. I think you have more time and are more intentional in what you guys are doing. Ours is very much built in. What I like to tell applicants is the community is built into our residency, because that's what we do. And then the question is how do you, and one of the real challenges that I think that we have is, how are we intentional about showing them that? right? Is that intentionality time or carving out time? Or is that, um, is that constantly pointing it out in the precepting and the work process? So I wanted to just start with a little bit of philosophy that I think we already covered, but like it needs to be integrated into the residency experience. I feel like a lot of residencies carve out community time, but they're still very separate from the community. And part of that, frankly, is when you're in a bigger university or a bigger hospital setting, you are separate from the community, but we're still serving the community. So how do you make that intentional? This is a question because I don't know the answer, but what we've tried to do is to really be part of the community that we serve. And so that's important. You have to take these things that you talked about into need, like the sustainability and opportunity for leadership. And one of the things that became important for us is that I didn't really feel like in a rotational experience where a resident had a brief project that would serve the community. But I did feel like there were opportunities for residents that were more motivated to have leadership. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But I think that leadership piece becomes really important. And then residents should be exposed to the principles of engagement, but they have a lot to do. I mean, in the community residency setting, their time is fully committed if I only do clinical stuff. And so figuring out how to value other time is interesting. And one of the feedback that we get from residents, particularly in the didactic space, is that when we do non-medical didactics, they complain. So how to put those together becomes really important. So one of the examples is they go and work with our mental health partners in the homeless clinic that they run. That's a combo primary care homeless clinic. And I'm teaching them principles of community engagement while they're seeing patients. So that's sort of a thing. And then finally, data is key. Residents need to see data about the community that they work in. So for us, we're lucky that we have some very specific data sources that we can identify. It's harder in a community that's bigger, but we can show them some of that data. So next slide. So we do have a community and behavioral medicine curriculum. I put them together because there's just so much interlap or interplay between those things. There is a formal set of experiences they have that are very similar to what you guys are doing, Allyson, that include volunteer stuff at the food bank, health department, Crossroads Safe House, lots of different visiting of community partners. We have them do a data exercise where they take data from a survey that a public health organization in the community does and data from the hospital's community health survey, look at that data, and then do a thought exercise of if there was something that they wanted to address that was a high value piece, how might they address that? Over the last 10 years or so, there's tons of examples of ideas that groups of residents have come up with. Back when I first started here in 1874, there was a community medicine project that each resident did. And what we found is that some of them completed it and did a great job. Some of them didn't. And sometimes they alienated partners doing that. And so I feel like it's better to do the thought exercise and then talk about, if you were in this community, how might you address that? And I don't know how rich that is, but that's what we're doing. All of them volunteer in our internal food pantry and have exposure to issues with food insecurity. We have a food pantry here, and I'll talk about that a little bit, but that's been an incredible boon to our community. It's utilized by our patients, but about half of the people who utilize it are not our patients. They have lots of exposure to the behavioral health system by working at Summit Stone Health Partners, which is our large county-wide mental health organization. And then they get exposure to school-based health through a school-based health center. Next slide. I think the key piece of the community that they really get to do this is our resident Suboxone clinic. This is a required experience. There is an organization in town called the Northern Colorado Health Project, which used to be called NCAP, or the Northern Colorado AIDS Project, down in Denver. It's called the Colorado Health Network. And we started a buprenorphine clinic there probably about 10 years ago. And it's a low barriers addiction clinic. It includes buprenorphine, Hep C treatment, and other forms of harm reduction. And we assign a resident medical director who's a leader there. All of them work in that clinic as part of rotational experience. It's every Wednesday night. So the person who's on night float every Wednesday starts on working in that clinic. And then there are other residents that are engaged, but that forces them to be in that community spot. And it's a place where really the clients that we serve there are not getting any care from anywhere else. And they're the people that won't come here. Because clearly we try to connect those people to primary care, but they're not coming. And they feel safe in that environment. And that longitudinal nature of that, they start that in the second year and do it through third year. They develop relationships with those patients and kind of see a lot, I think, about stigma and bias and how that affects people's ability to access care. So I really love that. I would love to say that we intentionally did that thinking about community medicine, but I think it was lucky, which is part of my maybe philosophy comment that I really think you need engaged faculty that live this work. And we need to figure out, and again, I don't have an answer to this either, because I like to joke that I'm a 1.2 FTE, how do we encourage our faculty to be engaged, not just in scholarly activities, but to be engaged in community activities? And how do we call those things the same thing? Because in family medicine, I think it's just as valuable that I sit on the public health board as it is that I publish a paper. And frankly, I have no interest in publishing papers. So to me, I would argue that it's maybe more valuable. So next slide. The clinic food pantry is a great COPC story. We had a grant that asked us to assess food insecurity. We looked at food insecurity, and a couple of the faculty were like, wow, our numbers are terrible. Why don't we start giving people food? So we partnered with the food bank of Larimer County, and we started giving out food. And in the months that we did that, 50% of our patients left the clinic with a bag of food. And the bag of food was non-perishables that would feed a family of 4 for a week. It's incredibly depressing when you think about it. We're also an FQ lookalike. About 70% of our patients have Medicaid. And I think we were all blown away by that. Those same folks felt like maybe we could have an internal food pantry. I thought they were crazy. I was wrong. We're now serving somewhere around 180 individuals a day sometimes. The number of people, what was really amazing was that the people that we serve, only half of them had ever actually used the food bank. And in Fort Collins, to get to the food bank is very, very inconvenient. Like the public transportation there is very challenging, often multiple buses. So we're serving a different community here than serves the food bank. And we thought we'd mostly serve our patients, but only 50% of the people coming to the food pantry are our patients. And so it's a very interesting thing to watch that happen. Somehow we were able to come up with funding for 1.5 FTE staff. Again, I think we found a donor that was excited about funding this. So that's great. We now have volunteers from the residency program, faculty, staff, and residents, CSU students and grad students. A number of the health and science and nutrition students come and volunteer there. And then there's lots of community members that volunteer. So it actually brings people into what we call our medical home, which is neat. The numbers are incredibly depressing, and also we can do this. So I think that's cool. Next slide. Faculty mentoring and engagement. I really think when push comes to shove, this is the most important part of a community medicine program. And I don't know how well we're doing this. I mean, I'm the Energizer Bunny, so I do a lot of this stuff, and I would no matter what. And you fall into roles as a family doctor in a community. Like, I love to say, like, I one day was at synagogue, and the next thing I know, I'm teaching a course on adolescent sexuality to synagogue members. Like how you fall into that is interesting. And I think that that's true for all of us, but being intentional about that allows you to translate that into an educational intervention. So there's lots of faculty engagement longitudinally. There's a number of us that serve on different community boards. I've been on the Board of Health for 10 years now, and I'm term limited, and I'm thankful that will end soon. I was the president of the Board of Health during COVID. I don't recommend that if there's a pandemic, being in that role. There's a group called the Health District of Northern Larimer County, which is a quasi-governmental public health organization that some of us have been on the board of. One of our members is on the board of Cobalt and works at Planned Parenthood. I'm on the board of a school-based health center. There's a harm reduction group. And then one of our faculty is on the board of the colorectal cancer screening arm of a Colorado organization doing cancer screening. We have a group called Healthy Harbors that we started that is a care management group that works with children in foster care. And those are things that sort of we developed over time to sort of make the community engagement foundational. And I'd love to say that all of those thoughts were, oh, we're making community medicine foundational. But more we had needs that we needed to fill, and we asked the question of how do we fill those needs and how do we do those in a sustainable way using those principles of engagement. I think that's what I got.
Awesome. Thank you, Bernie. That's so great. Yeah, that is everything. So we have some minutes for questions. If anyone, I know Emily Spencer was chomping at the bit.
Okay, and then I had problems unmuting myself. I'm here. So, yeah, I really appreciate this discussion. It has gotten my brain just thinking about things that I don't normally think about in my role as APD. But it brings up, I was kind of joking, but not really, this Larry Green style question of just like this big picture kind of where are we going with this kind of question, in that when, you did a great job just sort of defining what community engagement is, but I'm having a hard time defining what community is. Mm-hmm. And especially with like, more and more these days, I don't know, where there is just like a collapse of community. What is like, people don't really identify as being part of a neighborhood or even religion as much, although that seems to be, making a comeback. And so how do you think about that in creating this curriculum? Like, how do I define what is community, both for just thinking about it and also for the purposes of meeting objectives of this curriculum? And then, because it seems like, sorry, that's my baby crying in the background, that from the easy sort of like we want our residents to understand the patients that they're working with and where they're coming from. And so, but to me, that feels more like population versus community, right? They don't identify as being in a community of AF Williams patients. They're just the people that go to our clinic. So just some thoughts, and wondering if you guys had any thoughts about that as your local experts.
Ooh, pick me. Oh, no, go, Allyson. You go first.
Okay, I'll be quick. I was going to say that's a great question. And we have talked a lot about that when we were developing this curriculum. And I think we are intentional about defining community in a lot of ways, not just geographic, although that is part of how we define, but based around a particular health condition, a particular like resource patients may use. I think patient is maybe the foundation, and kind of from there, it's like the spoken wheels of, geographic, maybe by a condition like addiction, by a program that our clinic members can support them in, like food resources, is kind of how we've been intentional about that. But you're right. And I think there also is that inherent, like, it changes, and year to year, if we've identified a great partner, but then the needs of our patient population or defined community have changed, there's a little bit of catch up to that too, which I think makes it constantly evolving. And we, year to year, before we're ready to roll out the next academic year, actually spend time talking about this discussion and like, do the partners that we have still make sense for what the needs are, that our patients are telling us they need, or that we've kind of identified and based on organizations that are springing up in the area that our clinic and hospital is based. So it's definitely a challenging, somewhat philosophical discussion for us every year.
I'm going to say two things and then tell you what popped into my head as you were talking. The two things that I would say, first of all, is I really actually think in the residency education standpoint, you got to start with your patient population. Like, this is a population health question. Who do we serve? And what are the organizations that serve the people that we serve? Which I think is a great way of thinking about, for example, why do we send the residents for DV training at Crossroads Safe House? I think that becomes really like, why do we have them go to Summit Stone for behavioral health stuff? Like that piece is really important, and teaching them that when they get into practice, even if they're in a DPC, they're going to find that they serve elements like maybe the Mormon community, and that they need to be somewhat intentional or think intentionally about that. That was the first comment. What really popped into my mind was the Surgeon General's report on loneliness and social isolation. I think, is everybody familiar with that? One of the reasons that we need to teach this is that we do sort of live a little bit in a post neighborhood, post denominational world, and the number of our patients that are profoundly lonely is incredibly depressing. And by addressing the community medicine, having a community medicine experience and being intentional about that, and teaching about resources, part of what we're trying to do and part of what we can do in the primary care space is use the primary care space to build community. And where I really see that the most in our practice is through our addictions work, in our Suboxone clinic. Not the NCHN one, although that is an example of that too, but the internally. And so I just feel like if we can be intentional about thinking about how do we help our patients connect to community, not just community resources, that also begins to answer that question. And if somebody understands how do we do this in a post-religious world, I am a non-religious Jewish person. I do participate in synagogue because I want to have community, but I keep asking the question of what do we do in a world that doesn't have those organizations, or that 80% of the population doesn't participate in those organizations? How do we find caring and connection? And what is the role of healthcare in that? So.
All right. We have a question in the chat asking, is it okay to ask your patients, where do you find support in your community?
I think it's not only okay, I think it's essential. I mean, I think it's a required part of primary care or family medicine. I try to, having medical students all the time, I try to be ecumenical, but I'm not very good at that. I'm a preacher for family medicine, but I think it's required. I think if you don't know your patient and where they connect, where do they find support, I would argue you probably can't help them medically.
All right. Excellent. Do we have any last questions? All right, if not, I will throw one your way. I noticed you mentioned food banks, houses of worship as community sites that are, valuable and part of that community tour. But have you found any sort of other community sites that might be getting overlooked that have proven to be valuable?
Is that for me specifically, or to
anyone on the panel that wants to answer?
I mean, there are so many. And this is actually one of the problems that I find in my role is how do you curate those things? And that's where I think it becomes really helpful to understand who your community that you're serving is. So an example in Fort Collins is there's an organization that serves the Latinx community that's a faith-based organization called Isaac. And they've been doing health fairs. They've been doing immigrant support fairs where they have like lawyers and stuff like that helping patients or helping clients fill out powers of attorney for their kids, things like that. They asked us to support them with a health fair because they found that patients didn't feel safe going places and didn't know where they could go. And our practice is the only urgent care in Fort Collins that serves people regardless of their ability to pay. And so we started going to that. Well, I started going to that because I have a just say no problem. And now residents and medical students are going to that too. So I think that's a great example of something that came up that, we serve about 30% of our pregnant patient patient panel is undocumented. So we're serving that community. And it seemed like that was a good place to go. That's not a formal part of our curriculum, but that's sort of how I think about thinking about what those resources are, which is partially how we chose them.
And I think we're intentional about, like I mentioned, the kind of the plug and play options where there's a few smaller number of kind of cultivated partnerships we've had over many years, and then the opportunity to kind of choose your own adventure, which allows us to even expand our network. But I think it's beneficial in that residents, if they maybe have a passion for, for example, working with like patients that have domestic violence issues. That was not something that was like a pre-identified partnership for us, but we had a resident champion who really paved that way. And so trying to find that balance in our program has been important, because you can't cultivate, in my experience, there's only so many hours in a day. So if we were trying to cultivate 20 plus partnerships onward, we wouldn't be able to do it well. So we intentionally try to keep that number a little bit smaller, so that we can do the work well.
Excellent.
We'll always miss something.
Excellent. All right. So with that, we will go ahead and close out if there are no other questions. Once again, Doctors Bleacher, Westling, and Birnbaum, thank you very much for that outstanding presentation. I think we're all looking forward to the next presentation in June. So thank you all very much for attending today, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Really enjoyed this.
Bye, Lynn.